So now let's take a look at how to build this example from scratch. We're looking at a basic Hello World Android application, and we want to learn how to use the new project wizard and how to make changes to the project, and also how to set up the run configuration to test it out on some type of platform, either a phone plugged into the USB port or a virtual device. So let's get started here. We have the build example process. We're going to start with the new Android project wizard, and there's a number of questions that we'll fill out. Now, as a Visual Studio developer, say VB.NET or C#, a lot of the questions that we get under Android are not found in Microsoft Visual Studio. So things like a Java package name, things like the API level that really have no one-to-one correlation. So we'll explain that as we go. So the main user interface, basically the form, is going to be programmed in an HTML markup style of a language using the Android markup language, and the file name by default is called main.xml. And this is something that if we wanted to, theoretically, we could also change it in the Java code, but we're going to rely on the template structure here and just keep it as main.xml. Also, we're going to take a look at the primary Java class file, the activity.java file that contains the code. It's the entry point for the application when it starts. So if we were to go back in history and computer science and take a look at a language like C, we would expect to have a function called main, and that would be the entry point. But here in this example, we're going to take a look at how there's a Java class file, which is inheriting off the base class of activity. And within that, we're going to launch the main.xml as the user interface. Okay, so we're looking at the project that we tested just a moment ago. And we're ready now to build this example from scratch. So where do we start? There's a couple of different paths that we can go down to make this happen. First of all, from the File menu, we could say we want a new, and we could specify an Android project, and also we could go down to the Other window and we can find it listed there as well. But we'll choose File, New, and then Android project, and then we'll go through this dialog box. Now, this is a dialog box that doesn't look or feel anything like a Microsoft Visual Studio project wizard. Basically, it's utilizing some of the syntax and the nomenclature of a Java environment. So we'll start with a project name. This is something that we would see building a C# or a VB.NET application, is the project name. And whatever we specify here is something that stays within the developer environment. It does not make its way out into the phone. It doesn't make its way out into the Android market. So project name, call it something like, we'll mimic the same name here, Android Developer Toolkit, and we can tack on BE for build example or something like this to keep it separate. So we have Android Developer Toolkit, and I'll tack on a BE. This is going to only show up under Eclipse. In fact, that might even be a nice thing to indicate here. So we'll tack on Eclipse just to know where it's going. It's the Android Developer Toolkit sample. And we come down to this build target. So under build target, we're going to answer a question that we wouldn't answer if we were building an iPhone app, because the choices under iPhone, the hardware is set, but here the hardware is not set. And also the version of the Android OS is also not set either. So for example, we might still be building modern apps that are running under Gingerbread, Android 2.3.3 for a phone, but we might be building tablet apps that are using Honeycomb with Android 3.1. So basically what we're going to do is specify the target. Where is this application going to go? And we want to keep in mind this API level 10, because this becomes a filter as the minimum requirement for installing the app on a phone. So the platform is the version number. For marketing purposes, we see this plastered everywhere for Gingerbread 2.3.3. And the API level 10 is something that maps down here below as a number that's going to be compared at the time that the phone shops to the Android market. So we have this application name, and we see by default it's inheriting the project name, Android Developer Toolkit. But let's take this Eclipse off, and we'll tack on application just so that we can see that this is what it's going to be used for. Also, for the user interface, we say yes, create a default form, a default user interface, and we use the nomenclature activity, because an activity is like a form under VB.NET, except that the life cycle is different. It can actually be brought to the front or pushed to the back or even destroyed by OS events. The operating system can decide that the memory is getting too low, and it can actually destroy objects, destroy UI components, and that's a whole series of a chain of events that happen that we'll take a look at later. Now, the package name is something that is common for all Java applications, and it's this unique qualifier basically inside the phone, there's a folder that contains all the apps. And in order to create unique folder names, we're going to use our company's .com website address. And we'll actually see that show up inside of the phone once it's deployed onto either a real phone through the USB port or onto the virtual device. So let's set up a package name. We could say something like this, com.appdev. So the top level domain, com, comes first, then the .company name, and then our package name could come after that. So we could say Android Developer Toolkit _ package. And we have the name of the activity already set, and then the minimum SDK version. So the next question is optional. We'll click on Finish and jump right into the development environment. So here we go. We can minimize the project that we just looked at, and we'll expand the new project. And before we make any code changes, we'll launch this as a clean template just to make sure that everything's working correctly in the build process here for this development environment. And we can confirm the existence of the user interface here. So here's our Java file, Android Developer Toolkit activity. And also under the generated files, we could see that there's a reference to r.java. And under resources, we're looking for both the layout. So main.xml is the user interface description. It's the markup language, it's like HTML. And then under values, these are the config files that hold things that we might want to change for different languages, or just things that we want to be able to maintain without modifying any of the code in the rest of the application. So let's stop here. Before we write any code changes, let's go ahead and close the editors. And we'll start by setting up a run configuration that maps this project to something. Either A, it's going to go out to the USB port onto a phone, a physical phone, or B, it's going to go onto a virtual device. So under the Run button, we're going to choose Run Configurations. Under the Run Configurations, we're going to set up a new one. So inside the workspace, these are the relevant run configurations. We can see there are two projects. If we were to start a new workspace, this would blank out. We'd have to start from scratch. So we have my sample run configuration, and we'll bind that to a project. This is the project we're building from scratch. We'll flip over to the target platform and say manual. We'll just ask the developer at the time that we run the app whether we want to run it under a virtual device, or if we want to have it go through the USB port and install it on a physical phone. So that's it. We can hit run, and we could say go ahead and send it to the currently running emulator on port 554. Now the port number is a TCP/IP port number, so just like a web server's on port 80, this is running on port 5554. And if we were to run two separate emulators, say a Honeycomb tablet in conjunction with a Gingerbread phone, the port number also serves as a developer telephone number, so we could text message back and forth between these phones. We could call between the phones and actually simulate the two phones being used in a application environment. So okay. And let's go back to the home screen and let's wait for the app to come up. Okay, so what we can do is to flip over to that application. We can hold down the home button, and both of these have names that are pretty similar. So here we go. Hello World, Android application activity. That's the application that we're working with, and all we wanted to prove is that the build process succeeded without any errors and that this screen displayed, and we could see that that happened. So let's go back to the development environment, and we can start making some changes to this code just to illustrate the process of building and modifying an application. So let's take a look at how we can make some changes to this application. So for example, on the file main.xml, we know that the value for the text property is coming from a parameter called hello that lives in the strings.xml file. And the way that we reference strings.xml is by referencing @string and then looking for the content in strings.xml. So let's say that we wanted to make a change. We're going to insert a couple asterisks right in the middle of the message. And we'll save all these files. We'll relaunch the project inside the emulator. And these are the 3 asterisks we just added to our project. So basically, we know that the template works. We know that the changes that we made to strings.xml are reflecting here. And this basically demonstrates the process of creating a new project, walking through the wizard, launching it through run configuration, making a change to one of the config files, in this case the strings.xml file, and seeing that reflect here under main.xml. So basically, this represents the life cycle of building an application for Android under Eclipse. And as we go into more advanced features, we're going to focus a lot of attention within the Java programming language. Also, we'll focus more attention under the resources so that we can do a variety of different things. We can bring in graphic files like PNG files and place them into the drawable folders. We could create a landscape version of the user interface by adding a new folder here called layout-landscape, LAND for landscape. And then also we can reference additional strings in this config file if we wanted to add more for this application.